الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ولي الأولين والآخرين وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله وصفيه وخليله صلوات الله وسلامه عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. أيها الإخوة, in the previous lesson we were studying the rulings pertaining to ghusl al-mayyit, washing the body of the deceased. And we went through certain introductions and important guidelines. And today we go into the method of washing the deceased. And of course, as I mentioned previously, these lessons are based upon the book entitled Ahkamul Janaiz wa Bida'uha, the rulings regarding the Janaiz and the innovations by Shaykh al-Allama Muhammad Nasiruddin al-Albani rahimahullah rahmatan wasi'a. And as an English resource, if somebody wants to rely on an English resource, then this book, Funerals, Regulations and Exhortations by Shaykh Dr. Muhammad al-Jibali. And in the previous lesson, we went through some introductions and guidelines. So the first thing we spoke about is the hukam of washing the body of a deceased. So what's the hukam? What did we say? No. Ahsant. Fard kifaya. Wajibun kifai or fardun kifaya. And the meaning of fardun kifaya is that it is a communal obligation. إذا قام به من يكفي سقط عن الباقين. That if there are sufficient number of people fulfilling this obligation, then the burden or the sin is removed from everybody else. And if nobody comes forward to wash the body of the deceased, then every single one of us within that community, every single one of us is accountable and sinning until somebody comes forward and fulfills the obligation. And it is fardun kifai to wash the body of the deceased and also to hasten in washing the body of the deceased, meaning there should be no delay. And what's the evidence that it should be, this process should be hastened without any delay? What's the evidence? Hadith of Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu, that the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, Asri'u bil janaza. Asri'u bil janaza. Be quick and hasten with the janaza. And the meaning of janaza here is not only salatul janaza, but every step of the process without any form of delay. Because if it's a Muslim who died upon Tawheed, then you're only holding that person back from reward in the grave and the hereafter, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Also, evidences why it is wajib to wash the body of the deceased, ijma' al-madhahib, all of the madhahib, they agreed that it is fard kifaya. Also, because in washing the body of the deceased, there is takrimul mayyit. You are honoring the deceased. And a Muslim deceased has to be honored. And also, because the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam in various ahadith, he taught people how to wash the body of the deceased. And the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam, his body was also washed. His blessed body was also washed. And the Prophet ﷺ ordered with this. The man who died at Arafah, in the hadith of Ibn Abbas, the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, "Ighsiluhu bima'in wa sidr." Wash his body with water and a sidr. So all of these hadith show us that it is wajib. We mentioned that the shaheed, his body is not washed. So the shaheed is an exception. And when we say that the body of the shaheed is not washed, which shaheed are we referring to? Shaheed al-Ma'raka, Shaheed al-Qital, Shaheed al-Jihad fi sabilillah. As for the other shuhada, the other martyrs, whom the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam mentioned, like a person, Sahibul Hadam, who died due to a collapsing of a building, or a woman who died due to child labor and he called her a shaheed, or a person who dies in a plague, or a person who dies due to drowning, or a person who dies due to a disease in the intestines or the stomach, etc., those shuhada, then they are shuhada in terms of some of the reward in the akhirah. But when it comes to the rulings of the dunya, then they are like any other deceased person. So take that as a principle. Any ruling with regards to the janaiz, exceptions only apply to Shahidul Ma'raka, Shahidul Qital, and not the other shuhada who have been mentioned. And then we spoke about the washing of the body of a baby or a fetus who dies upon childbirth or before birth. So we said that if the baby is born, wastahalla, and he has moments of independent life, even if it is breaths or a few moments of independent life, then it is an obligation for the body of that child or that infant to be washed, because he is a person like any other Muslim. And we said that if the fetus dies in the womb of the mother, so this is before birth, whilst in the womb of the mother, however, 4 months have passed of pregnancy, 4 months or more, then also it is mustahab, it is encouraged for the body to be washed, or it is permitted for the body to be washed if it is possible. And this is because after 4 months, the ruh, the soul, is blown into the body and it becomes a person, it becomes insan. And therefore, the various rulings of birth or a newborn, like naming the child and giving aqiqah and washing the body and praying janazah, all of this applies istihbaban if it is after 4 months. And if the fetus died in the womb of the mother before 4 months, meaning 120 days, then it is not washed. Why? Because it is merely muscle and tissue, as has been described in the Quran. And then we spoke about the muhrim, and the muhrim is the one who has assumed the state of ihram in order to perform hajj or umrah. And is the muhrim washed or not? Zubair? Is not washed? Naam, he's washed. The muhrim is washed. The only difference is, so the muhrim is similar to any other person, any other Muslim who dies, except that when it comes to the kafan, then his face is not to be covered. His face and his head is not to be covered. And he's shrouded in his kafan, he's shrouded in his ihram, or 2 cloths similar to an ihram. Because of the hadith of Ibn Abbaas, when that man died at Arafah, due to his animal hitting him, the hadith is in Sahih Bukhari and Muslim, he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, اغسلوه بماء وسدر, wash him with water and a sidr. And then we spoke about the kafir, washing the body of the kafir. And we said that giving ghusl to the body of the deceased, this is specific for the Muslims, because in it is takrimun lil mayyit, honoring the Muslim deceased. And as for the rights of the kuffar upon the Muslims, then this applies when they are alive, that we treat them with kindness and respect and gentleness and hikmah and give da'wah to them, etc. And we give them gifts and we visit them whilst they are ill. All of this is permitted. However, when that person passes away, then there is no more rights between the Muslim and the kafir. So this is specific for the Muslims only. If there is nobody amongst the kuffar to bury the body of one of their own, then we assume that responsibility and we bury the body. But as for ghusl and salah and dua, etc., then it is not for the kuffar upon the Muslims. And neither is it permitted for a kafir to wash the body of the Muslim deceased, because this is an act of ibadah, and ibadah requires Islam and al-ikhlas and al-tawheed. However, it is permitted for a kafir, who for example may be a relative of the Muslim, to be present whilst the body is being washed by the Muslims. Like for example, you have a father who was a non-Muslim, and the child who was a Muslim, his son or daughter was a Muslim, and the body is being washed. He's present whilst the body is being washed to witnesses. This is permitted. As for washing the body of the deceased, it is for the Muslims. After this, we spoke about how many people should wash the body of the deceased. And what's the answer? How many people should wash the body of the deceased? Can you remember? Ahsant. The maximum amount that are needed to wash the body of the deceased. So there is no number if it requires 3 people, 4 people, 5 people. Sometimes, especially in the case of sisters, women, it requires more. Then the number of people who are required to wash the body of the deceased, they are the ones who wash the body of the deceased. As for additional people attending the taghsilul mayyit, the washing of the body without any need, then this is something which is not legislated. And this is the madhab of the majority of the fuqaha. And they said that one of the reasonings is that it is disliked for a person to uncover the body of the deceased or look at the body of the deceased if there is no need to do so. And therefore, the number who are required to wash the body, those who should are the ones who should attend. After this, we spoke about, and all of this is from the previous lesson, who has the greatest right in washing the body of the deceased. So if, for example, amongst the family, there's a disagreement, who wants to wash the body of the deceased, then who has the first priority? Do you remember? Before the father? No. No. Those whom the deceased mentioned in his wasiyah that I want fulan and fulan to wash my body. That has to be carried out. Then after that, as the brother mentioned, the father, and then the grandfather, and then the sons, and then those who are closest to the deceased. And the same when it comes to the women. That the first right is for those who she has specified in the wasiyah. And then after this, her mother, her grandmother, her daughters, and those women who are closest to her. Is it permitted for a wife to wash the body of a husband and vice versa? What did we say? No. And what's the evidence? The hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha, she said, لو استقبلت من أمري ما استدبرت, that if I could go back and do it again, ما غسله إلا نساءه, that nobody would wash the body of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam except his wives. لو استقبلت ما استدبرت من أمري, if I could go through that again, if I could make that decision again, then only his wives would wash him. And then also we spoke about a situation if a woman dies amongst men who are ajnabi to her, meaning they are not from her relatives or her mahram. Or a man passes away amongst women, and all of those women, they are ajnabiyat to him, are not related or not mahram to him. So then how is the ghusl done? Who remembers? No? At-tayammum. We said then the fuqaha, they mention that at-tayammum is performed. Because this is similar to, like for example, if water was not found, or if water cannot be utilized, then similarly there is nobody present to wash her body who is permitted to look at her, or to touch her, or to uncover her awrah. And therefore, tayammum is done. Wallahu a'lam. And then we spoke about the intention of the niyyah of the person who is performing the ghusl. And that is that person firstly seeks the reward which is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that he is fulfilling an act of ibadah, and he's fulfilling the rights of his Muslim brother or her Muslim sister. and also that he is fulfilling this obligation so that the burden and the sin is removed from the rest of the community. And finally, we spoke about, I think we spoke about this, is it permitted for a person to be paid something in terms of compensation or honorarium to wash the body of the deceased? And the madhab of the Jumhur, amongst them Shaykh Ibn Abbaas rahimahullah from the contemporary ulama, is that this is permitted. It's permitted for a wage to be taken or stipulated or a compensation to be given to wash the body of the deceased. And they said because this wage which is being taken, this is in compensation of an action which is benefiting other people. And so an action which benefits other people, like teaching somebody or giving somebody a lift, for example, and this is a service which you're doing, is permitted for some form of compensation or a wage to be taken. And also because one of the rights upon the wealth of the deceased is mu'unat tajheez, that from his wealth, that which is required for the janaza, it is taken from his wealth. And this includes the ghusl and the other procedures in the janaza. And now we come to today's lesson, and that is, how is the body of a deceased washed? And as a reminder, after we complete this series of lessons, then by the permission of Allah, we will be doing a series of practical sessions in the ghusl room for men, and a sister for the sisters separately. So that we will do later on. Today we are going through the ahkam and the theory. So the first step, of course, is to remove the clothing of the deceased. To remove the clothing of the deceased. And this is taken from the hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha, that when the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam passed away, the people, the Sahaba, his family, they differed amongst each other. And they said, Wallahi ma nadri an nujarriduhu min thiyabihi kama nujarridu mawtana am nughassiluhu wa alayhi thiyabu. We don't know. Should we remove his clothing like we do with our deceased and wash him? Or should we wash him on top of his clothing? And the fact that they said, kama nujarridu mawtana, just as we remove the clothing of our deceased, it shows us that the practice amongst the Sahaba at that time was to strip the deceased from the clothing. So this is the first point, that the clothing is removed. And at the same time, whilst the clothing is removed, the awrah of the deceased has to be covered. The awrah of the deceased has to be covered. And so practically speaking, a cloth which is relatively heavy, so it doesn't fall off, like a very large towel or a cloth which is dense, it is placed on top of the awrah, the area of the awrah for the man between the knees and the navel, and then the clothing is removed. And in most cases, the clothing is removed using a scissor. So the clothing is cut away, whilst the towel or the large cloth, which is heavy and dense, it remains upon the awrah of the deceased, or covering the awrah of the deceased. And of course, the covering of the awrah of the deceased, wujuban. This is an obligation. And this is something which you have to pay attention to, especially when picking the body up, moving the body towards the right or the left, or washing the body, or moving the body towards its side, or placing the body of the deceased in the coffin, or afwan, the shroud, or nowadays in the coffin, or bring the body out from the refrigeration, etc. We have to make sure that the awrah of the deceased, it always remains covered and concealed from the eyes of the people. And just as it is not permitted for a living person to look at the awrah of another living person, then similarly it's not permitted for the living person to look at the awrah of a deceased person. The second step is to raise the head and the upper body of the deceased to raise it slightly. And the reason why it is raised is that if there is any discharge, any najasa which remains in the bowels, then for that to be discharged. And so the head of the deceased and the upper body of the deceased, it is raised slightly. And it can be raised close to its sitting position or just before a normal sitting position. And then also the stomach area is pressed gently. And again, the stomach area is pressed gently so that if there's any discharge in the bowels, then it is removed. Any najasa, it is removed. And this often occurs. Often when the body is raised or sat up or the stomach is pressed gently, there often is some najasa which is removed. And if this is not done, then perhaps later on, after the body has been shrouded, there may be a discharge of some type of najasa, some type of bodily discharge or impurity. Pay attention to the wording of the fuqaha. They said, يَعْصِرُ بَطْنَهُ بِالرِّفْقِ, that the stomach, it is pressed gently. And the reason why they said بِالرِّفْقِ, they said لِأَنَّ الْمَيِّتَ فِي مَحَلِّ الشَّفَقَ وَالرَّحْمَةِ, that the deceased right now is in a situation of you showing it compassion and gentleness. So everything which is done with the body of the deceased, from right at the beginning to the burial, everything is done with care and concern and with shafaqa, compassion and gentleness, and being very soft with the body of the deceased. And then after this, the fourth step is that those who are going to wash the body of the deceased, one or two amongst them, they wrap their hand with some form of wrapping. Now that might be a towel, or nowadays gloves are used, sometimes sponges are used, any type of khirqa, any type of wrapping, so that the hand of the washer does not touch the body of the deceased. And so the first step is for a form of istinja to be done, meaning that the area around the private parts, that is washed. So that is washed with water, and it can be, the area surrounding the private parts can be cleaned and rubbed, but not physically with the hand, with a sponge or a glove or a towel or a fabric which is wrapped around the hand. So this is a type of istinja which is being done. And again, this is so that any type of najasa which remains, that it is washed away. And practically, sometimes, depending on the fabric, you can pour water on top of the fabric and the water will reach the body. Or the water is poured beneath, when I say fabric, beneath the covering of the awra. The water is poured beneath the covering of the awra without looking at the awra. So a person lifts a side from the cloth or the towel and pours water, and the other person, with his hand being wrapped, rubs so that the najasa, it is removed. The neck, and this is done, there's no number, 3 times, 5 times, 7 times, there's no number. It is done until you think, غَلَبَةَ الظَّنِّ, that the najasa has been cleaned. And similarly, when it comes to the raising of the body and pressing of the stomach gently, then it can be repeated as long as there is a need to do so. So there is no specific number. The next step, the fifth step, is that if it is a woman and her hair was tied in braids, then for her hair to be undone. For her hair to be undone. Then after this, now the ghusl is going to begin. So previously everything was in preparation for the ghusl. Now the washing of the body is about to be started. And so the first step is the niyyah and the basmala. Because when we make wudu, when we make ghusl, we say Bismillah. And like this, when you're performing the ghusl upon the body of the deceased, the basmala, it is said. And then the first step in washing the body of the deceased after all of that preparation is to begin by giving a wudu to the body of the deceased. Just like we do in al-ghusl, the most perfect form of ghusl, how the Prophet ﷺ used to do, is first he would begin with wudu, and then he would cover all of his water, wash all of his body with water. So the first step is to begin with the limbs of the wudu. And this is with the hand being wrapped or using gloves or sponges. So still the fuqaha, they mention, even after the istinja, then it is better for the body not to be touched. And Shaykh al-Albani rahimahullah in his book Ahkamul Janaiz, he said, يُغْسَلُ بِخِرْقَةٍ أَوْ نَحْوِهَا تَحْتَ سَاتِرٍ لِجِسْمِهِ بَعْدَ تَجْرِيدِهِ مِنْ ثِيَابِهِ كُلِّهَا. That the body of the deceased is to be washed with some form of wrapping or cloth or towel or sponge, etc., beneath the covering which is covering the aura of the deceased. He said, Al-Albani rahimahullah, فَإِنَّهُ كَذَلِكَ كَانَ الْعَمَلُ عَلَى أَهْدِ النَّبِي صَلَى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم. Because this was the method which was practiced during the time of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And when washing the limbs of wudu, then like you do when you are alive, you begin with your right hand limbs or right side limbs, also with the body of the deceased. So when it comes to washing the hands or the arms or the feet, etc., then you begin with the right hand side first and then the left hand side, like you do when you make wudu. And this is from the hadith of Atiyya radiyallahu anha, and Sahih Bukhari and Muslim. The Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam, when he ordered the women to wash the body of his daughter Zainab, he said to them, Ibda'na bi mayaminiha, begin with the right hand side of her body, wa mawadi'ul wudu minha, and with the limbs which are washed during the wudu. And so a complete wudu is done, including the mouth and the nostrils. However, the washing of the mouth and the nostrils is not by placing water inside the mouth or the nostrils. Rather, the fuqaha mention that the hands, a person's hands are wet, and you wipe the teeth of the deceased and also the nose or the inner parts of the deceased, and you clean what you can clean. So you don't place water inside the mouth of the deceased like we do when we are rinsing our mouth. Rather, with wet hands, you clean the lips and the teeth and inside the nostrils, or what a person is able to do so. Because this is also a part of wudu, and so it is done to the deceased. And then we mentioned the washing of the hands and the mouth and the nostrils, and the washing of the face completely as we do in wudu, and then the arms from the fingertips to the elbow, the right one first, and then the left one, and then the wiping over the head with wet hands, and then the washing of the feet, the right one first, and then the left one, as well as at-takhleel bayn al-asabi', washing between the toes and between the fingers, as we would do in wudu. A complete wudu is done. And after the wudu has been done, then the ghusl is given, meaning ghusl ta'meemul ma' ala al-badan, that now water is going to be poured over the whole body. After the wudu, water is going to be poured over the whole body like we do in our ghusl. And this water which the ghusl is given with, it should be like the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, اغسلوه بماء وسدر, wash him with water and a sidr. And a sidr are leaves of the lot tree, and it's mentioned, and you see this from experience, that when it's mixed, that those leaves, they dissolve in the water and they act like soap, and the water becomes like soapy liquid. And this is how in the previous days cleansing was done. During the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, sidr or sidr leaves, crushed sidr leaves, they would be used in the water for it to be like a soap or some form of detergent. So whether a person uses sidr itself or any other type of soap, all of it is permitted, because there is no special fadila, there is no special virtue in sidr itself with regards to washing the body of the deceased. Wallahu a'lam. Sidr was only mentioned because that is what was used in those times as a form of soap. So if a person mixed some form of body wash or soap in water, in a bucket of water, and then made ghusl with it, then that is sufficient. And if a person wanted to use sidr because of how good it dissolves in the water and the smell that it has, then also this can be done. So anything can be done. Any soap-like product. And also, when washing the body of the deceased, ibda bimayaminiha, as he said sallallahu to Mu'tiyya and the women regarding his daughter, that you begin with the right hand side of the body. So first you wash the right hand side of the body, and a person rubs the body of the deceased, and then the left hand side of the body, and a person rubs the body of the deceased. And usually when 4 or 5 people are required, or 5 or 6 depending upon the deceased, it's usually because there is one who is holding the water and pouring the water, and there are 2 or 3 who are holding the body and turning it on its right hand side, and then turning it on its left hand side to wash the right and the left, and then 1 or 2 who are rubbing the body of the deceased. And this is why typically 4 or 5 are required. And if the deceased is bigger, and the frame of the body was bigger, or especially in the case of sisters, if they are weaker as they are, then more people may be required. So this is something which has to be minded. And then after the right hand side of the body has been water has been poured over it, and it has been rubbed, and then the left hand side, then the whole body is rinsed with water. And the rinsing of the whole body with water, it is done 3 times or 5 times or 7 times or even further. As long as there is a need to do so, it can be done, because often in the body of the deceased there may be some form of dirt or discharge, and especially nowadays when stickers or bandages are removed or some form of wrapping is removed, you'll see the mark of the stick on the body of the deceased, and therefore it may require more than 3, 5 or 7 times of rubbing and washing according to the need of the body of the deceased. However, it is recommended that it should be an odd number of times. So 3, 5, 7, 9, an odd number of times. And this is from the hadith of the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam. He said, اغسلنها ثلاثا أو خمسا أو أكثر من ذلك إن رأيتن ذلك. That wash her body 3 times or 5 times or more if you see a need to do so. He said, بِمَاءٍ وَالسِّدْرٍ, with water and a sidr. And when you're finally washing the body, the complete body of the deceased, you have to, of course, also rub the hair and make sure that the roots of the hair are being washed, just as we do in al-ghusl. And similarly, when it comes to the beard and the roots of the hair of the beard. And then the final wash which you do, the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, وَجَعَلْنَا فِي الْآخِرَةِ كَافُورٍ. That in the final wash, place some kafur in the water. And kafur is a form of perfume. So again, it is something which is solid, it's white in color, and it's something which is solid, and it has a pleasant fragrance, and when it is crushed and placed in water, it dissolves. However, the fragrance, it remains. And again, Wallahu a'lam, it's not because of a particular fadila in kafur itself, but because it perfumes the body, fragrances the body. So anything which perfumes the body can be utilized, whether it is kafur or other than kafur. However, people often prefer kafur, and this is what we use when we wash the body of the deceased. So therefore, in the last washing of the body, then some form of perfume or some kafur, it is placed in the water. And typically what we do is we have 3 buckets, and in the first 2 buckets of water, in big buckets, we will place water and sidr or some other form of soap, and it is dissolved. And then in the 3rd bucket, which will be the last one, then that is reserved for water and only kafur, without any sidr or soap. Because in the last one, the point is for that soap to be washed away from the body and also for it to perfume the body. And this is why we use 3 separate large buckets. I think they 10 liters, 20 liters, or 20 or 30 liters, large buckets which are used. The fuqaha, they mention that if there is any bodily discharge after the istinja was given, after the wudu was given, after the ghusl was given, let's say you notice that there is some more discharge from the private parts of the body, then the wudu does not need to be done again. It is only the ghusl at the end. Yani you can do another form of just the ghusl, meaning the pouring of the water over the whole body and the rubbing of the area where there is discharge. So that can be repeated again, but the wudu itself does not need to be repeated more than that. After this, the fuqaha mention that it is recommended, or some of the fuqaha mention that it is recommended and encouraged for the nails to be clipped, and for example, some of the hair to be tidied or the mustache to be tidied. They said this from the angle of takmilu nidafa, that it is a completion of the cleanliness. You're perfecting the cleanliness, that you're also trimming the nails and the mustache or something which requires to be trimmed, and Allah knows best. And also, if it is a woman, then her hair is to be tied or braided into 3 and placed behind her. And then after this, of course, the body of the deceased, it is to be dried, and also it is mustahab for the hair to be combed and the beard to be combed, etc. And this is the steps which are required when it comes to washing the body of the deceased, ghuslan kamilan, the most perfect form of washing, ghusl. The al-ghusl al-mujzi, meaning the minimum level, the basic, most minimum level, if a person did this, the ghusl is complete, is for water to touch and cover and wash the whole body of the deceased. This is sufficient. So if you, after istinja and saying Bismillah, you poured water of the body of the deceased, and this was done 1 time or 3 times or 5 times, and water touched the whole body of the deceased and it was cleaned, then this is sufficient. This is valid. However, this is al-ghusl al-mujzi, meaning the minimum level which is valid. But that which is mustahab and recommended, and that which the Prophet ﷺ taught, are all of the steps which we have mentioned. And after this, there's a number of adab which I'd like to highlight and emphasize when it comes to washing the body of the deceased. Firstly, the ulama, the fuqaha, they mention that those people who are going to assume the responsibility of washing the body of the deceased, they have to be thiqatan aminan arifan bi ahkamil ghusl. They have to be trustworthy, people of truthfulness and honesty, and they should know the ahkam of washing the body of the deceased. Or at the least, there should be a talib al-ilm present who knows the ahkam of the washing the body of the deceased, and he can direct them in terms of what to do and how to do it and the general adab. And if he sees anything wrong or any bid'ah which are being done, then he's there to warn the people against those bid'ah. And also, ayyuhal ikhwa, from experience, the majority of bid'ah are done during this time. When it comes to janaiz, this is when you will see the bid'ah being done, whether it's in the graveyard or before burial, after burial, during the Salatul Janazah. This is where the majority of the bid'ah are being done, because people think that they are doing something good for the deceased. So you'll see, for example, the kafan, the cloth, the kalima is written on it, or Bismillah is written on it, or the answers to the 3 questions in the grave, they are written on the kafan. And bid'ah which are done before Salatul Janazah, after Salatul Janazah, etc. And recently, and it was mentioned, there was a janazah which was done here in this town, and the men were told to move to the side, and it was the women who assumed the responsibility of taking the body and placing the body inside the grave at the graveyard. And subhanallah, this bid'ah has never been heard of, according to my knowledge, in 1440 odd years of al-Islam. And then, a few weeks ago, in Nelson in the graveyard, this is something which was done. So al-Muhim, this is the time where there is a lot of bid'ah, innovations and shirkiyat and mistakes and misguidances, and therefore that talib al-ilm is required to speak and direct the people. Also, ayyuhal ikhwan, the other side, this is also the time in which the hearts of the people are softest, and they are receiving and open towards receiving da'wah. And also they will remember how you stood there and you helped them and you guided them, and even though you didn't need to be there, the fact that you took part and you advised them and you did the ghusl, and nobody wants to do the ghusl of a deceased, but the fact that you did and you helped them, they will also remember this act of goodness. So in both cases, it's important for da'wah to be given. It is not a condition that the one washing the body of the deceased has to be upon tahara. So if those who are washing the body of the deceased, if they are not in a state of wudu, or even if it is a woman who is in her menses, there is nothing preventing them from washing the body of the deceased. We said that it is an obligation from the beginning to the end for the awrah of the deceased to be covered at all times, and neither is it touched nor is it looked at. Also, the process of the taghsilul mayyit has to be hidden from the eyes of the people, because again, would you like for somebody to see half of your body naked now whilst you are alive? No. And so who would like for their body to be seen and they are deceased? And maybe there are injuries and disabilities and things that you've been hiding behind your clothes that nobody has ever seen, and you've hidden them. And therefore, it's an obligation, wujuban, that the body is washed in an area or a place which is completely concealed from the eyes of the people. And nobody is allowed to enter or look in unless they are actually washing the body of the deceased. And this is due to various evidences, general evidences. The Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Man satara musliman satarahu Allahu yawm al-qiyamah," that whoever conceals a Muslim, whoever conceals the defects or the imperfections of a Muslim, then Allah will conceal his sins on Yawm al-Qiyamah. And these defects, these blemishes are physical in terms of things that you don't want other people to know, your private matters, and also in terms of sins. A Muslim does a sin which is hidden, and you see that Muslim doing the sin, you're not allowed to expose the Muslim. Rather, you have to conceal the sins of the Muslims. And neither do you investigate the sins of the Muslims. Rather, you overlook their sins and you conceal their sins as long as they are sins which are private and they are not harming other people. As for sins which are done in the public, or sins which are harming other people like bid'ah and the spreading of innovations, then these have to be exposed, so it does not harm other people. And also because one of the reasons why the body of the deceased has to be hidden from the eyes of the people, and it's not permitted for a person to speak about anything which you saw from the body of the person. Again, you may see certain things from the body of the deceased which he has hidden for his whole life, and he has never allowed anybody to look at that part of his body because of some form of defect or disability. And so there is an amana upon your shoulders that you never speak about anything which you saw during that process. And neither do you comment on anything which you saw during that process. Whether it's a smell, whether it's a discharge, whether it's how heavy or how light that body was, whether it's a disfiguration in his body, his color, blemish in his skin, etc., an injury, an illness, or something which was sown, something which was seen, then it is not spoken about. In fact, the ulama, they consider this to be ghiba. They consider this to be ghiba. So just as the ghiba of a living person is haram, then also the ghiba of a deceased Muslim is haram. And what is ghiba? ذِكْرُكَ مِنْ أَخِيكَ مَا يَكْرَهُ. That you mentioning something regarding your brother which he dislikes for you to mention. Even if it was true, even if it existed, there's something that he disliked for it to be mentioned or known, then you mention that thing, it is ghiba. So we have to cover the awrah, and we don't allow anybody outside the people who are washing the body to look and enter into the room or look at the body. And neither are we permitted to speak about anything regarding the deceased that we saw during the process. Also, from the adab is that if there is a lack of water, or for any reason the water cannot be used, then tayammum is made on the body. Then tayammum is made on the body. And this is, in the four madhahib, all of them mention this, the legislation of tayammum if water cannot be found. And finally, after the ghusl is done, then it is legislated and it is encouraged, mustahab, not wajib, but it is encouraged for those who perform the ghusl on the deceased, for them to go take a ghusl. Because the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, "Man ghassala mayyitan falyaghtasil." Whoever washes the body of a deceased, then let him go perform ghusl. But this is something which is mustahab, and it is not wajib. Wallahu a'lam wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina wa sallam. If there's any questions, you're welcome to ask your questions. Tafadhal, Saleh. Yeah, the asl is that the only people who attend the washing of the body of the deceased are those people who are required. That's what, because it's makruh, you know. And even there may be reasons why the deceased has requested for certain people to wash his body and not other people. Yani, the deceased in his wasiyah, he may even exclude some of his family members. And he might choose certain people who are not related to him. And it might be because of some defect in his body. And he's always hidden that, and he doesn't want somebody from his family to know. So he excludes them, and he specifies that these people are doing my ghusl. So for this reason, the people who should attend are those who are required to wash the body of the deceased. Tafadhal. I'm the same. Wudu and ghusl and tayammum, all of it is the same. Why? Because the ahadith, they mention the word wudu, and they mention the word ghusl, and they mention the word tayammum. And so, tayammum is what is defined as tayammum, and same with ghusl, and same with wudu. So when the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Ibda bi mawadi' al-wudu," begin with the limbs of wudu, we know the limbs of wudu. So it is the same wudu and tayammum which are understood in the Sharia. As you know, with regards to a person who abandons salah or is lazy over salah, therefore does not pray salah, the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he called this action kufr. He said, بين الرجل أو بين المؤمن وكفره أو شركه الصلاة فمن تركها فقد كفر. That between a person and his iman, or between a mu'min and his kufr, is salah. So whoever abandons the salah has disbelieved. And therefore, many amongst the ulama consider the one who left the salah to be a kafir, meaning kafir kufrun akbar, such that the rulings of Islam, they don't apply to that person in terms of inheritance, in terms of salah, in terms of nikah, etc. However, it's been mentioned, and my own ears heard this from our Shaykh Badr al-Utaybi hafidhahullah, from Shaykh Ibn Baz rahimahullah, and he was from those ulama who considered it to be kufr. However, when it came to washing the body or the janazah or the salah, then he never refused to pray the salah over a Muslim. So he would say that, but when it came to praying the salah, then he never left the salah over a Muslim. It was something which he was mentioned, but he would wash the body of the deceased. And neither is it allowed for us to investigate or to question whether he used to pray. Now, as you know, the ulama mention that it's permitted for ashabul ilmi wal fadila, for example, the imam of the masjid, that he refuses to pray a particular janazah, and instead he instructs others to pray the janazah over that person. And that is in order to rebuke this action. So for example, as an example, let's say you had a drug dealer and known for a criminal, but he died upon Islam, and it's not known that he made a tawbah. And the imam wants to use this as a lesson for the rest of society, that his actions and his crimes are so serious that I'm not going to lead the janazah, but somebody else will lead the janazah. Then that is something which is legislated. And this occurred with the Prophet ﷺ, that the one who passed away and he had taken from the war booty without permission, and the one who passed away and he died with debts upon him and he had no intention to pay off the debts, the Prophet ﷺ refused to pray the janazah over them, but he instructed the Sahaba to pray janazah over them. So the janazah is legislated, but from the angle of az-zajr, from the angle of it being an admonishment for the rest of society, then the imam can do that. And that is based upon the potential maslaha and mafsada. The imam, he estimates whether it's more beneficial to pray or not to pray as a lesson for the people. No, it's for the perhaps the only thing which is removed is the contact lenses. As for tattoos, I don't know anything regarding piercing, anything regarding fillings, tooth fillings. From the angle of takmil al-nadafa, takmil al-tanzif, from completing and perfecting the ghusl, maybe in terms of jewelry or, like I said, piercings, that can be removed. But in terms of the filling of the teeth, I think that's takalluf. That's going too far now, removing things like that. And Allah knows best. Allahu A'lam. Yeah.
I don't know if that would be a right position to, bring up the books and say this is.
Yeah. No, always, when it comes to changing an evil, there are 3 levels to changing an evil, and these 3 levels are based upon a person's authority and a person's ability. And they are taken from the hadith of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radiyallahu anhu in Sahih Muslim, in which the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, "Man ra'a minkum munkaran falyughayyirhu biyadihi." That whoever amongst you sees an evil, then change it with your hands. فَإِن لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ. If you do not have the ability to do so, فَبِلِسَانِهِ. Then speak, say it with your tongue. وَإِن لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ. And if you're not able to do so, فَبِقَلْبِهِ وَذَلِكَ ضَعْفُ الْإِيمَانِ. Then hate it in your heart, and that is the weakest form of Iman. So they mention that as for changing an evil physically, yani by force or physically, then this is for the people of authority. So for example, the father with regards to his son, he has the right to physically discipline his son or prevent an evil. Or for example, the authorities in a Muslim country, the qadi, the police, the army, etc., the ruler, the sultan, they are the people who have that physical, the authority to change something physically. Then the next step down is to speak against it with your tongue. And they say that that is the authority of the people of knowledge and the imams, the khutaba, etc., that's their status to speak against something, to advise against something. Al-amr bil-ma'ruf wa-nahi anil munkar. And then as for hating it in your heart, then this is for the rest of the people. And those who don't necessarily have knowledge or they don't have that authority or the place to speak against something, then it's better for them to hate it in their heart. So the point is, and of course when we say a-talib al-ilm, we don't mean by this a graduate from the Islamic University of Medina or the imam of a masjid, meaning somebody who knows the rulings of the janaiz. Somebody who has studied and knows the rulings of janaiz and the right and the wrong and the sunnah from the bid'ah, that he's the one who should assume that responsibility. So in that situation, all you have is nasiha, and that you speak about it with your tongue. But generally speaking, that family have allowed you to be there because they trust you and they look up to you. And from experience, they are usually open to guidance and listening to what you're going to advise with. Now, we suffice with that because the adhan is close. هذا والله أعلم وصلى الله على نبينا وسلم.